Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday, May 30th. In my devotion for today, I want to touch base on two different major issues that are going on around us in our society. And the first one has to do with all of the mostly peaceful protests that are happening throughout the country. Yes, some of them have turned violent, and they are in response to a multitude of things. It's very easy to try and take sides on these issues. Issues are deeply embedded in our American psyche, our culture, and so much of the experience that many of us have and many of us don't have. But I want to quote Martin Luther King Jr. On the subject. He said that one of the biggest problems that we have to address is the many wounds that racism has created and embedded in our American culture. The American experience is not equal or the same for all of us. Some of us have lived in an experience of America, growing up in America, that is highly different than others. The long term systemic institutional influence of racism has caused wounds, deeply seated and felt wounds in our society. And during moments like these, when our tensions are already high, when all of us are feeling the stress of the COVID-19 pandemic and all the restrictions on our freedom, when we see the deaths that have happened in the videos and the ways that has been captured in the last week. Three prominent deaths in the last 2 weeks. A woman in Atlanta when the police mistakenly invaded her home. A man who was just out jogging who was killed, as well as the death of a man in Minneapolis at the hands of the police. All of this, basically, they're like little sparks that ignite inside the great tension that is inside so many people that we're feeling. Some of it from recent events like COVID-19, others from a long stemming wound that is caused by systemic racism that is built into our culture and society over decades and decades that people have experienced. We see this. Sometimes we're horrified, especially when it comes out of an experience of America that is so different than our own. And we wonder, what do we do? How do we respond? Well, one of the ways that we respond is by saying, yes, we want to uphold peace. But upholding peace doesn't mean that we avoid racism, that we avoid the problems. Too often, those who are privileged use the term, oh, we ought to just be for peace as a way of avoiding some of the deep seated wounds that are in our culture and our society that result in these kinds of violent outbursts. To be a person of peace means that we just don't want to see these kinds of protests, but it also means that we want to be for the equal treatment of all people in all ways throughout our society. And then we stand up and we are for policies that help to bring justice to all and equal treatment to all. It's a hard road to be on because so often we think of freedom and peace for others only if it doesn't impact my life, only if I don't have to sacrifice anything that I'm used to or I want. But when we want to live in a society where all people are treated fairly, that means sometimes we have to give up some of our privileges, some of the things that help make our lives easier at the expense of others. Let's do that. Let's work for peace on a nationwide scale, not just in small terms, but also let's look at the larger problem that causes such deep seated anxiety, fear, anger, and resentment of one group of people towards the other. The second issue I wanted to come on in my devotion for today is an update on our worship services. There's been lots of news this past week. We were given a set of guidelines about how we can go about opening our churches. And then yesterday or late Thursday night, Governor Pritzker changed them. He made a new set of guidelines. Well, not a new set of guidelines, but he changed his position somewhat. What this means is that our way forward isn't as clear as we might want it to be. We want to open up our building to our ministry activities. We want to regather in physical worship with one another in our sanctuary as soon as possible. But at the same time, we want to do it in such a way that does not risk people's lives. And so what we've met as a council, and what we're going to continue to do is to chart a way forward where we are going to be using these guidelines that Winnebago Health Department has given us and the state of Illinois has given us about recommendations about safe ways to gather once again for worship. We are working through that, making some changes in our worship space and in how we do worship. It's going to be uncomfortable because it's going to be different for many of us. We're not going to be able to go right back to the way we used to worship because it's not safe. It's too easy for us to inadvertently pass a very difficult disease onto some people that might be deadly, and we don't want that to happen. So we are meeting this week. We have a task force. We have our worship team and our property committee, and we're going to be meeting together. They're going to form a task force to help us sort through the guidelines and figure out what is the best way and the safest way for us to get back together again. I know you want me to give you a date. It's at least 2 weeks away, probably closer to 3 or 4 weeks away before we will begin on a limited basis allowing people to come into worship. But we won't be able to fill our sanctuary. We'll have to have guidelines about how we do different things. And as we have a full plan of how we're going forward, we will communicate that to you. We'll let you know, and we will look forward to when we can physically worship together again. In the meantime, we still have worship. We have not stopped worshiping. Every Sunday, we have worship together live on Facebook at 9 a.m. The video of that is posted on YouTube afterwards. Please join us tomorrow, again, live at 9 a.m. on Facebook for our worship service. In the meantime, take care of each other. Work for peace on every level that you can, and look in on those who are most vulnerable. Amen.